When the alarm started blaring at the naval compound, everyone hit the ground. Everyone except the pizza delivery guy. While trained soldiers took cover, he stood perfectly still, listening. Then he did something that made everyone realize they'd been wrong about him. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. We're growing every day, and your support means everything. Jake Martinez had been delivering pizzas to Naval Base San Diego for exactly 18 months. Every Tuesday and Friday, 1:47 p.m. sharp, he'd pull his beaten Honda Civic through the main gate, exchange pleasantries with the guards, and make his way to the commissary building. Same route, same smile, same friendly wave to the personnel he'd grown to recognize at AT-24. Jake looked like every other pizza delivery driver in Southern California. Medium build, friendly face, always wearing the red Mario's Pizza uniform with the sleeves rolled down to his wrists. The base security team had long since stopped doing thorough checks on him. Regular delivery, clean background check, polite kid who never caused problems. What they didn't know was that Jake Martinez wasn't his real name. The guards at the gate, Petty Officer Williams and Seaman Rodriguez, had come to expect him. "Hey, pizza guy," Rodriguez would call out, barely glancing at Jake's ID anymore. "Got anything good for us today?" "Just the usual orders," Jake would reply with that same easy smile. "Though I might have grabbed an extra slice of pepperoni if you guys are interested." It was a comfortable routine. Comfortable enough that nobody questioned why a pizza delivery driver always seemed to know exactly where he was going on a military base. Comfortable enough that nobody noticed how his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, cataloging personnel movements, security positions, and patrol patterns. Jake had been studying this base for 18 months, and today, that study was about to pay off. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun was having the kind of day that required pizza. Budget meetings all morning, personnel reviews all afternoon, and a stack of incident reports that seemed to grow every time she looked away. When the commissary called to say her usual Friday order was ready, she felt the first moment of relief she'd had all week. The commissary was buzzing with the usual Friday energy. Sailors grabbing snacks, officers picking up supplies, civilians making their weekly runs. Sarah spotted the delivery driver right away. Same kid who'd been coming for months, always professional, always on time. Lieutenant Commander Chin. Jake approached with 2 large pizza boxes. "Pepperoni and supreme, just like you ordered." "You're a lifesaver," Sarah said, reaching for her wallet. She'd ordered from Mario's dozens of times, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the stress, but she found herself actually looking at the delivery driver for the first time in months. That he was young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of easy demeanor that made people feel comfortable. But there was something else, a stillness in his posture, an awareness in his eyes that seemed unusual for someone in his line of work. The way he held himself reminded her of something, though she couldn't quite place what. "Busy day?" Jake asked conversationally as she counted out bills. "You have no idea," Sarah replied. "Sometimes I think civilian life might be easier." Jake's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Military life has its challenges," he said quietly. "But most people don't understand what it takes to serve." There was something in his tone, a depth that surprised Sarah. This wasn't the casual comment of a civilian making conversation. This sounded like someone who understood exactly what military life entailed. "You serve?" she asked. Jake smiled that same friendly smile. "I serve pizza," he said. "Same difference, right?" Sarah laughed, but the feeling that there was more to this kid lingered as he walked away. Over the next several weeks, Sarah found herself paying more attention to the pizza delivery driver. It started as simple curiosity, but gradually became something more focused. There were small things that didn't quite add up. The way he moved through the base with absolute confidence, never hesitating at intersections or asking for directions. The way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, not nervously, but systematically, like someone conducting reconnaissance. The way he seemed to know names and faces of personnel he should have only seen in passing. Most telling was an incident 3 weeks earlier. Sarah had been walking past the main entrance when she saw Jake talking to the gate guards. Nothing unusual there. He was always friendly with security. But she'd caught a fragment of their conversation that stuck with her. The patrol routes changed again. Jake had asked casually. "Yeah, 3rd time this month," Petty Officer Williams had replied. "Command's got us switching things up for some reason." "Smart," Jake had nodded. Predictable patterns make everyone vulnerable. It was the kind of comment that could have been innocent, a civilian making an observation about security. But something about the way he'd said it, the casual expertise in his tone, had made Sarah pause. She'd started making mental notes after that. The way Jake always seemed to arrive during shift changes, when attention was divided. How he asked questions that seemed casual, but were actually quite specific about base operations. How he never seemed surprised by increased security measures or changes in protocol. Sarah had spent enough time in military intelligence to recognize the signs of someone gathering information. The question was whether Jake Martinez was doing it intentionally, or if she was letting paranoia get the better of her. That question was about to be answered in a way she never could have anticipated. Friday, October 15th, started like any other day. Jake arrived at the base at 1:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. The morning had been routine. 12 deliveries around the city, 2 to office buildings, 1 to a construction site. Normal work for a normal pizza delivery driver. But Jake Martinez wasn't a normal pizza delivery driver. And this wasn't going to be a normal day. He'd been monitoring radio chatter all morning through the scanner hidden in his car's dashboard. Nothing unusual, routine communications, patrol check-ins, the standard background noise of military operations. But around. I never imagined. That's what made the cover work, Jake said. Everyone knew something was slightly unusual, but not unusual enough to investigate. I was hiding in plain sight. Over the following weeks, as the investigation into the terrorist cell continued, the full scope of Jake's 18-month operation became clear. Naval intelligence had placed him at the base after receiving credible threats about an impending attack, but they hadn't known when it would come or how it would be executed. Jake's cover, as a pizza delivery driver, had been perfect for several reasons. It gave him regular, predictable access to the base without raising suspicions. It allowed him to interact with personnel from all levels of the organization, from enlisted sailors to senior officers. Most importantly, it let him observe the base's operations from a civilian perspective, identifying vulnerabilities that might not be apparent to military personnel. But the operation had required Jake to completely suppress his military identity for 18 months. He had to learn to act like a civilian, to think like a pizza delivery driver, to respond to situations the way someone without military training would respond. The hardest part hadn't been the physical requirements or the intelligence gathering. The hardest part had been watching military operations and security procedures while pretending not to understand their significance. There were dozens of times when I wanted to make suggestions about security improvements or offer insights about tactical vulnerabilities, Jake explained during one of his debriefing sessions. But doing so would have compromised the operation. Instead, he had documented everything, building a comprehensive picture of the base's operations, personnel, and potential vulnerabilities. When the attack finally came, Jake had 18 months of intelligence to draw upon. That intelligence had saved lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic terrorist attack on a major military installation. The story of the pizza delivery driver, who turned out to be a Marine Force reconnaissance operator, spread quickly through military channels and eventually reached the media. Jake found himself receiving recognition from multiple levels of the military hierarchy, from his immediate commanders to senior Pentagon officials. But the recognition that mattered most to him came from the people he had worked with during his 18 months undercover. Petty Officer Williams, one of the gate guards who had checked Jake's ID twice a week for over a year, visited him during his post-operation recovery period. "I keep thinking about all those times you came through the gate," Williams said. "You were always friendly, always professional, but I never suspected you were military. How did you do it?" "By remembering that the cover story was just as important as the intelligence mission," Jake replied. "I wasn't pretending to be a pizza delivery driver. I was actually being a pizza delivery driver who happened to also be gathering intelligence." Sarah Chan also visited, bringing with her a pizza from Mario's. "I thought you might want one last delivery from your old route," she said with a smile. "Actually," Jake said, "I'm going to miss the pizza deliveries. There was something satisfying about the routine, about providing a service that people genuinely appreciated. What's next for you?" Sarah asked. Jake considered the question. After 18 months of undercover work followed by the intensity of the terrorist attack, he wasn't sure what came next. His Marine Force reconnaissance training prepared him for many things, but transitioning back to regular military duty after such an extended civilian cover operation presented unique challenges. "I think I'll probably return to more traditional military assignments," he said. But this experience taught me something important about the value of understanding military operations from a civilian perspective. 6 months after the terrorist attack, Jake Rivera found himself in a very different role. Instead of delivering pizza or conducting covert reconnaissance, he was standing in front of a classroom full of military intelligence officers, teaching them about the principles and techniques of long-term undercover operations. The most important thing to understand, Jake told his students, is that effective cover requires you to actually become the person you're pretending to be. You can't just act like a pizza delivery driver. You have to think like one, respond like one, and genuinely care about doing that job well. The classroom was filled with experienced intelligence officers, but they listened to Jake with the attention reserved for someone who had proven the value of his methods under the most extreme circumstances. "How do you maintain your military readiness while living as a civilian?" one student asked. "You adapt your training to your environment," Jake replied. "I couldn't do traditional military PT routines without risking my cover, so I developed fitness habits that fit with civilian life. I couldn't practice tactical skills openly, so I found ways to maintain those skills through activities that seemed consistent with my cover identity." Another student asked about the psychological challenges of long-term undercover work. "The hardest part is watching military operations and knowing you cowl. The attackers would know security protocols, patrol routes, and personnel schedules. Traditional security measures wouldn't be enough to stop them. So naval intelligence had done something unprecedented. They'd placed one of their most skilled operators inside the base as a civilian, allowing him to study every aspect of the facility's operations while appearing to be nothing more than a friendly pizza delivery driver. Jake had spent 18 months mapping every building, memorizing every security protocol, and identifying every potential vulnerability. He'd observed patrol patterns, learned personnel schedules, and noted every change in base operations, all while delivering pizza twice a week with a smile. Most importantly, he'd developed contingency plans for exactly the kind of coordinated attack that was happening right now. Jake moved through the base with the confidence of someone who had spent months memorizing every pathway and shortcut. While chaos erupted around him, he navigated toward the north gate using routes that kept him invisible to both the attackers and the base's defensive forces. The sound of automatic gunfire was getting closer, accompanied by shouted orders in English and what sounded like Arabic. Jake's intelligence briefings had suggested the terrorist cell was international, with members from at least 3 different countries. The linguistic mix he was hearing confirmed that assessment. As he approached the north perimeter, Jake could see the situation clearly. 4 armed men had breached the fence line and were moving systematically toward the main administrative complex. They moved with military precision, using tactical formations that suggested professional training. But Jake had advantages they didn't know about. That he knew this base better than anyone. He knew where they were going before they did. And most importantly, he knew they were expecting to face base security. They weren't expecting to face someone who had been planning for this exact scenario for 18 months. Jake activated his radio. "Control, Falcon. Visual on 4 hostiles at North Breach. They're heading toward admin complex via the main pathway. I can intercept." "Negative, Falcon. Fall back and wait for backup." "Control, backup is going to be too late. These guys know exactly where they're going. If they reach the complex, we'll have hostages." There was a pause. Then, "Falcon, you are cleared to engage." "Repeat, you are cleared to engage." Jake smiled grimly. For 18 months, he'd been a pizza delivery driver. It was time to remember how to be a Marine. The 4 terrorists moved toward the administrative complex with professional efficiency. They had studied this base for months, knew the layout, understood the security protocols. They had planned for resistance from base security, from local law enforcement, even from rapid response teams. They hadn't planned for Staff Sergeant Jake Rivera. Jake's approach was invisible and systematic. Using his 18 months of reconnaissance, he moved through maintenance areas and service corridors that didn't appear on any official base maps. He knew where the blind spots were in the security camera system because he'd identified them during his pizza deliveries. He knew which routes would let him get ahead of the attackers because he'd walked them dozens of times. Most importantly, he knew exactly what their target was. The administrative complex housed the base's communication center and command facilities. If terrorists could take control of those systems, they could cripple the base's ability to coordinate with outside forces and potentially access classified information. It was exactly the kind of high-value target that a sophisticated terrorist cell would prioritize. Jake reached the complex 30 seconds before the attackers arrived. 30 seconds to set up an ambush that would neutralize 4 armed terrorists before they could achieve their objective. The first terrorist rounded the corner of Building 3 and walked directly into Jake's trap. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes, but it represented the culmination of 18 months of preparation and a lifetime of training. Jake had positioned himself in the maintenance alcove between Buildings 3 and 4, a location he'd identified during his second week of pizza deliveries as the perfect ambush point for anyone approaching the administrative complex. The alcove provided cover, multiple escape routes, and clear sight lines in all directions. The first terrorist never saw him coming. Jake's initial strike was silent and efficient, neutralizing the threat without alerting the other 3 attackers. 1 down. The second terrorist realized something was wrong when his partner failed to check in, but by then Jake had already moved to his secondary position near the loading dock of Building 4. Another location he'd scouted during months of routine deliveries, another tactical advantage gained through careful observation disguised as civilian work. The engagement was brief and decisive. Jake's training and preparation overwhelmed the terrorists' planning and equipment. Within 90 seconds, all 4 attackers had been neutralized. Control, Falcon. Jake spoke into his radio as he secured the terrorists' weapons. North breach is clear. For hostiles down, no friendly casualties. Copy that, Falcon. Outstanding work. But Jake wasn't done. His intelligence briefings had indicated this was a coordinated attack with multiple elements. If 4 terrorists had breached the north gate, there would be others hitting different targets simultaneously. Control, what's the status on the other breach points? We have reports of explosions near the fuel depot and possible hostiles at the main armory. Jake was already moving. 18 months of pizza deliveries had given him detailed knowledge of both locations. If he could reach them in time, he might be able to prevent this attack from becoming a catastrophe. The base's fuel depot was located on the southeast corner of the facility, separated from the main buildings by design, but connected by a network of service roads that Jake knew better than almost anyone. During his months of deliveries, he'd noticed that the depot's security relied primarily on its isolation. Few people had reason to visit it regularly. That isolation made it a perfect target for terrorists looking to cause maximum damage with minimal resistance. Jake arrived at the depot to find a scene of controlled chaos. 2 explosions had damaged the outer fence, and smoke was rising from one of the smaller fuel tanks. But the main storage facilities appeared intact, which meant the attackers either hadn't reached their primary objective yet, or were still in the process of setting larger charges. Through his surveillance training, Jake had learned to read tactical situations quickly. The pattern of damage suggested the terrorists were working systematically, starting with smaller targets to test response times before moving to the main fuel storage systems. It was a professional approach that confirmed these weren't random attackers. They were trained operatives with a specific plan. Jake activated his radio. Control, Falcon. At Fuel Depot, I see evidence of systematic approach to target destruction. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel within 500 meters of main storage. Copy, Falcon. Evacuation in progress. Can you assess threat level? Jake was studying the facility when he spotted them. 3 figures in military-style gear, moving purposefully toward the main storage complex. They were carrying equipment that looked like sophisticated demolition charges, the kind of explosives that could turn the entire depot into a massive fireball. Control, I have visual on 3 hostiles with heavy explosives approaching main storage. If they succeed, the entire southeast section of the base will be compromised. Falcon, backup is en route, ETA 4 minutes. Jake looked at the terrorists' progress, calculated their approach speed, and the time it would take them to plant explosives. For minutes would be too late. Control, I'm going in. For 18 months, Jake had delivered pizza to every section of this naval base. He'd learned the layout not just as a military facility, but as a living, working environment where real people went about their daily routines. That knowledge was about to save lives. The fuel depot service area included maintenance tunnels that connected the various storage facilities. Tunnels that Jake had discovered during a delivery mix-up 6 months earlier when he'd gotten lost looking for a personnel office. Most people would have seen those tunnels as confusing underground passages. Jake had seen them as potential tactical routes, that he entered the tunnel system from the administrative building and moved through the underground network with absolute confidence. Above ground, 3 terrorists were approaching their target with sophisticated explosives. Below ground, a Marine Force reconnaissance operator was approaching them with 18 months of local intelligence and a lifetime of training. Jake emerged from the tunnels directly behind the main storage facility, putting him in the perfect position to intercept the attackers before they could plant their charges. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. They were focused on their target, moving in the open, completely unaware that someone was positioned behind them. But as Jake prepared to engage, he realized something that changed his entire approach to the situation. One of the terrorists was wearing a base security uniform. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. One of the attackers was wearing the uniform of base security. Not a stolen uniform, but one that fit properly, showed appropriate wear patterns, and included security badges that appeared authentic. This wasn't just an external terrorist attack. There was an inside component. Jake's intelligence briefings had mentioned the possibility of inside assistance, but seeing it confirmed changed the tactical situation dramatically. An inside operative with no security protocols, have access to restricted areas, and be able to provide the kind of detailed intelligence that made the attacker's systematic approach possible. Worse, if there was one inside operative, there might be others. Jake immediately altered his approach. Instead of engaging the three attackers directly, he positioned himself to observe and gather intelligence. Through his surveillance training, he knew that inside operatives often revealed more information through their actions than through direct interrogation. The person in the security uniform was clearly directing the other two attackers, pointing out specific locations and explaining what appeared to be security protocols. Jake activated the recording function on his tactical radio and began documenting everything he observed. "Control, Falcon," he whispered. "Be advised, we have confirmation of inside assistance." "Repeat," inside operative confirmed. The response from Control was immediate and tense. "Copy, Falcon. Can you identify the operative?" Jake studied the person in the security uniform, but from his position, he could only see general build and movement patterns. However, something about the way the operative moved was familiar. Not someone Jake recognized directly, but movement patterns that reminded him of someone he'd seen before. That's when the inside operative turned around, and Jake saw his face clearly. It was Petty Officer Rodriguez, the guard who had been checking Jake's ID twice a week for 18 months. The friendly sailor who always asked about extra pizza slices and complained about rotating patrol schedules. Rodriguez had been in the perfect position to gather intelligence about base operations. He had access to security protocols, personnel schedules, and facility layouts. He knew which areas were vulnerable and when security would be lightest. And he had been observing Jake's routine pizza deliveries for 18 months. Just as Jake had been observing the base's operations, Jake watched Rodriguez direct the other terrorists toward the main fuel storage facility. He realized the full scope of what had been happening. For 18 months, he had been conducting reconnaissance on this base while maintaining his cover as a pizza delivery driver. During that same period, Rodriguez had been conducting his own intelligence gathering operation while maintaining his cover as base security. They had been playing the same game, on opposite sides, without either one knowing about the other. But now Jake had a critical advantage. Rodriguez knew about pizza delivery schedules and base security protocols, but he didn't know that the pizza delivery driver was actually a Marine Force reconnaissance operator. Rodriguez thought he was dealing with predictable base defenses and civilian personnel, that he wasn't prepared for Staff Sergeant Jake Rivera. Jake made his decision quickly. Instead of trying to stop three attackers simultaneously, he would use the inside operative's knowledge against him. Rodriguez was directing his team based on intelligence about base security procedures, but those procedures wouldn't account for an undercover military operator with detailed facility knowledge. Jake activated his radio. "Control, Falcon. I'm going to let them plant their first charge." "Negative, Falcon. Do not allow them to dash." "Control, trust me. I need them to commit to their position before I engage. The inside operative is directing them based on standard security response protocols. If I engage too early, they'll adapt, and we might lose them." There was a pause, then. "Falcon, you have 30 seconds before we implement emergency evacuation of the entire southeast section." "Understood. 30 seconds is all I need." Jake watched as Rodriguez led the two terrorists to what appeared to be the primary target, the main fuel storage tank that supplied the base's operational vehicles. It was exactly the kind of target that would cause maximum disruption with minimal explosives, and exactly the kind of tactical thinking that confirmed Rodriguez's inside knowledge. But Rodriguez didn't know about Jake's 18 months of facility reconnaissance. He didn't know that Jake had identified this exact scenario during his third month of pizza deliveries and had developed contingency plans specifically for an attack on the fuel depot. Most importantly, Rodriguez didn't know that the service tunnel Jake had used to reach this position connected directly to the emergency shutdown systems for the entire fuel facility. 20 seconds. Jake moved through the service tunnel with absolute silence. 18 months of facility knowledge guiding every step. Above ground, Rodriguez was directing his team to plant explosives that would turn the fuel depot into a massive fireball. Below ground, Jake was implementing a plan that would neutralize the threat while protecting both the facility and the people inside it. The emergency shutdown systems for the fuel depot were located in a maintenance room that Jake had discovered during his fourth month of deliveries when he'd helped maintenance staff locate a gas leak. The systems included not just fuel line shutoffs, but also fire suppression systems that could flood the entire storage area with inert gas, making explosions impossible. Jake reached the maintenance room and quickly activated the emergency protocols. Within seconds, the fuel lines to the main storage facility were shut down, and inert gas began flooding the storage area. Even if the terrorists succeeded in detonating their explosives, there would be no fuel to ignite. But Jake wasn't finished. The shutdown systems also included emergency lighting and communications protocols that would illuminate the entire depot area and allow base security to see exactly where the attackers were located. Control, Falcon. Emergency shutdown activated. Target area is now secure from explosive threat and fully illuminated for engagement. Outstanding, Falcon. Security teams are moving to intercept. But as Jake emerged from the tunnel system, he realized the situation had changed again. Rodriguez had heard the emergency systems activate and immediately understood what had happened. Instead of proceeding with the original attack plan, he was now directing his team to evacuate the area. Jake couldn't let them escape. Rodriguez's inside knowledge made him too valuable to the terrorist organization and too dangerous to leave operational. For 18 months, Jake Martinez had been a friendly pizza delivery driver who always arrived on time and always had a smile for the base personnel. Today, Staff Sergeant Jake Rivera was going to make his final delivery. Rodriguez was moving quickly toward the perimeter fence when Jake intercepted him. The two terrorists with him had scattered when the emergency systems activated, but Rodriguez was attempting to reach an extraction point that his inside knowledge had identified as having the lightest security coverage. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Jake had identified the same extraction point months earlier and had developed specific countermeasures for anyone attempting to use it. Petty Officer Rodriguez, Jake called out, stepping into the open. Rodriguez spun around, his weapon ready, then stopped in confusion when he saw who had called his name. Pizza guy? What the hell are you doing here? This area is under attack. You need to get to shelter immediately. Jake smiled the same friendly smile he'd been using for 18 months. Actually, Rodriguez, I think you're the one who needs to worry about shelter. Something in Jake's tone made Rodriguez pause. The friendly delivery driver was gone, replaced by someone with obvious military bearing and tactical awareness. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he began to understand that something wasn't what it appeared to be. Who are you? Rodriguez demanded, his weapon now pointed directly at Jake. I'm the guy who's been delivering pizza to this base twice a week for 18 months, Jake replied calmly. I'm also the guy who's been watching you gather intelligence on base operations for the same 18 months. Rodriguez's expression changed as the implications sank in. You're military. Marine Force reconnaissance, Jake confirmed. And you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and terrorism. Rodriguez raised his weapon, but Jake was already moving. 18 months of appearing harmless and untrained had been the perfect preparation for this moment. Rodriguez was expecting to face a pizza delivery driver who had stumbled into a dangerous situation. Instead, he was facing a Marine Force reconnaissance operator who had been preparing for this exact confrontation for over a year. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, Rodriguez was on the ground, his weapon secured, and Jake was calling for medical assistance. Control, Falcon. Inside operative is secure and requires medical attention. Recommend immediate counterintelligence sweep of all base personnel with access to security protocols. 3 hours later, the naval base was secure. All attackers had been neutralized or captured, the explosive threats had been contained, and emergency personnel were conducting final sweeps of all facilities. Jake sat in the base commander's office, still wearing his Mario's Pizza uniform, giving his detailed debrief to a room full of officers who were still trying to process what had happened. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was among the officers present, and she kept staring at Jake as if she was seeing him for the first time. Which, in many ways, she was. Staff Sergeant Rivera, the base commander said, your 18-month operation successfully identified and neutralized what appears to have been a sophisticated terrorist cell with inside assistance. The intelligence you gathered during your undercover assignment prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack. Jake nodded. Thank you, sir. But I want to emphasize that this operation succeeded because of the cooperation we received from base personnel. Everyone I worked with during my cover assignment, from the gate guards to the commissary staff, provided information and access that was essential to understanding how this facility operates. Sarah Chen spoke up. The pizza deliveries, that was all intelligence gathering. Partially, Jake replied. I was conducting reconnaissance and building relationships that would let me understand base operations from a civilian perspective. But I was also actually delivering pizza. Mario's Pizza is a real business, and those were real orders from real customers. Including my orders? Sarah asked. Jake smiled, the same friendly smile she'd seen dozens of times over the past months. Especially your orders. Your regular Friday pizza habit gave me consistent access to the administrative complex and allowed me to observe security protocols during shift changes. Sarah shook her head in amazement. I thought there was something different about you. The way you moved, the way you asked questions. But, 1:30, the chatter had changed. Brief, coded messages that most people would have dismissed as routine. Jake knew they weren't routine. As he pulled through the main gate, he noticed subtle changes. An extra guard at the checkpoint. Additional personnel near the administrative buildings. The kind of increased presence that suggested something was happening, even if nobody was talking about it openly. Hey, pizza guy. Rodriguez called out from the gatehouse, but his usual casual demeanor was replaced by heightened alertness. Busy day? Jake asked, the same question he always asked. Something like that, Rodriguez replied, not elaborating. Jake nodded and drove toward the commissary, but his mind was already working through possibilities. Increased security could mean anything. A VIP visit, a security drill, or something more serious. The radio chatter he'd monitored suggested it wasn't a drill. He parked in his usual spot near the commissary building and grabbed the pizza bags from his back seat. For orders today, larger than usual, which meant more people would be staying on base over the weekend. That was information worth noting. As he walked toward the building, Jake's trained eyes catalogued everything around him. Personnel positions, vehicle locations, escape routes, potential choke points. 18 months of observations had given him a detailed mental map of this facility, but today felt different. Today felt like the day he might need to use that map. He was halfway to the commissary entrance when the first alarm went off. The base alarm system had different tones for different emergencies. Fire alarms were steady, high-pitched wails. Weather warnings were intermittent blasts. Security alerts were rapid, urgent bursts that made your heart rate spike the moment you heard them. This was a security alert. Jake stopped walking, but he didn't hit the ground like everyone else around him. While sailors and officers dropped to defensive positions, training kicking in automatically, Jake stood perfectly still in the middle of the courtyard, listening. The alarm pattern told him this wasn't a drill. The radio chatter bleeding from nearby vehicles told him this wasn't a single incident. And the systematic way security personnel were moving told him this was something they'd been preparing for. Get down! Petty Officer Williams shouted from his position near the main building. Pizza guy, get down! But Jake wasn't moving. He was analyzing point 3 alarms from different directions meant multiple breach points. The way the security teams were deploying meant they were responding to threats from the north and east sides of the base. The rapid movement of personnel toward the armory meant this was being treated as a potential combat situation. Someone was attacking the naval base, and they were doing it with enough coordination to trigger a full emergency response. That's when Jake did something that made everyone realize they'd been wrong about him. Instead of diving for cover like a civilian should, Jake set down the pizza bags with careful precision and reached into his jacket. When his hand came out, it was holding a military-grade tactical radio, equipment no pizza delivery driver should have possessed. Control, this is Falcon. He spoke into the radio with calm authority. I'm inside the perimeter, requesting immediate situation report. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, who had been running toward her command post, stopped dead when she heard those words. She turned to stare at the pizza delivery driver, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The way he moved. The way he asked questions. The way he knew so much about military operations. Jake Martinez wasn't a pizza delivery driver. Jake Martinez was military. Falcon Control. The radio crackled back. We have armed hostiles at gates 2 and 4. Unknown number of combatants. Base is under lockdown. What's your status? I'm mobile and undetected, Jake replied, his entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the friendly, casual delivery driver. In his place stood someone with obvious military training, speaking with the clipped precision of a professional soldier. Falcon, be advised. We have reports of explosives. Repeat, potential IED threat. Can you confirm? Jake was already moving, but not toward cover like everyone else. He was moving toward the sound of gunfire that had just erupted from the north gate. Sarah Chen watched in amazement as the young man she'd known as a pizza delivery driver transformed before her eyes. His movements became fluid and purposeful. His awareness shifted to combat-level alertness. This wasn't someone pretending to be military. This was someone who had extensive training. Lieutenant Commander, Jake called out to her as he passed. I need you to coordinate evacuation of non-essential personnel from buildings 3 through 7. Who are you? Sarah demanded. Someone who's been preparing for this day for 18 months, Jake replied. Then, into his radio. Control, I'm moving to visual on the north breach. We'll report back in 30 seconds. Before Sarah could respond, Jake was gone, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who knew exactly where he was going and exactly what he was doing. What Sarah Chen couldn't have known, what nobody at the naval base could have known, was that Jake Martinez had been placed there by naval intelligence 18 months ago, specifically to prepare for a day like today. His real name was Staff Sergeant Jake Rivera, Marine Force Reconnaissance. His specialty was deep cover infiltration and counterterrorism operations. And for the past year and a half, he'd been living the perfect cover life while conducting the most important reconnaissance mission of his career. Intelligence had indicated that this naval base was being targeted by a sophisticated terrorist cell with inside knowledge of base operations.